Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday. This is Seattle Now. If you have plans to travel with young children this summer, I'm betting the Delta variant has made you stop and think twice. In a minute, we'll talk with a pediatrician at Swedish Hospital about how parents of young children can stay safe through this phase of the pandemic. But first, let's get you caught up. Governor Inslee says state employees have 2 months to get a COVID vaccine or lose their jobs. Inslee said yesterday he wants all state employees fully vaccinated by October 18th. Mayor Durkan made the same call for city employees. State Republican leaders aren't on board with the governor's plan. They say a mandate is heavy-handed and would rather see incentives. The state's biggest employee union says it will address any vaccine mandates at the bargaining table. The office workers aren't back yet, but more people than ever appear to be moving downtown. The data comes from a report out yesterday from the Downtown Seattle Association. According to the Seattle Times, just under 100,000 people called downtown home. Occupancy and rents also both hit new highs in 2021. And vaxxed Americans can travel to Canada again. After more than 16 months, the Canadian border is back open. Ours, however, remains closed. If you are planning to travel, bring a negative COVID test and be prepared to flash your vaccine card. Also, plan for possible delays and long wait times. Workers at the border are on strike. Sleepovers, playdates, water parks, even school. These were all things kids couldn't wait to get back to as vaccination rates went up and cases went down. Now with Delta circulating, families are wondering when to press pause on their kids' activities. Washington has a high vaccination rate, but this more contagious variant is wreaking havoc, especially among the unvaccinated. Young people under 12 still waiting for vaccine approval. That could come in the fall. In the meantime, parents have to figure out how to keep them safe. Dr. Elizabeth Mead is here to help. She's a pediatric hospital medicine physician at Swedish and the immediate past president of the Washington chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Good to talk to you, Dr. Mead. Sounds like we got the right person.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So we were all looking forward to a more relaxed summer, but this Delta variant changed mostly everything for a lot of people. What is it about this variant that makes it so dangerous?
Great question. I mean, I was certainly in that group of people who was really looking forward to the summer and really hoping that things would be different than they have sort of shaken out to be. I think the thing that's so tricky about the Delta variant is that while we know the vaccine is the absolute best way to protect ourselves and dramatically decreases that risk of serious illness, hospitalization, and death, this is a very contagious, very transmissible variant. And we also know that people who are vaccinated can transmit it to other people, even if they themselves are sort of protected from getting sick. So it really does change the game in terms of how we're thinking about that sort of community immunity.
Yeah. And I am curious then what a fifth wave of COVID looks like in a pediatric unit at Swedish right now.
Gosh, at this point, doesn't it sort of feel like one continuous wave? I mean, we talk about the fifth wave, but it just sort of feels like it's been ripples of the same thing. You know, across the country and certainly here in Seattle, we are starting to see numbers of pediatric hospitalizations go up. So while this has traditionally been one of those very rare viruses that sort of spares kids, that preferentially is difficult for older people, and that's quite unusual. Usually viruses are really hard on young kids. This has been different, and I think that has provided all of us with a little bit of sense of calm and sort of protection for our kids who are not yet eligible for the vaccine. But unfortunately, as we're starting to see those numbers go up across the country, we are also seeing the numbers of pediatric patients go up. And so even though that percentage of kids with dramatic illness or serious illness is still small, the overall numbers are continuing to climb. And we're hearing from units across the country that they are full with COVID patients. And we anticipate that this is going to be a very rough fall in Seattle for pediatric patients as well.
This is such an important clarification that you're making here because this is really a matter of scale.
That's exactly right. So kids at this point are about 25% of the new cases of coronavirus. And so in the last week that we have data for, we saw 72,000 cases of COVID in kids across the country. That was double the previous week, and it was about 5 times our June numbers. So it's just inevitable that as these overall numbers go up, again, even if that's just a few percentage points of kids who get really sick, a few percentage points of 100,000 is very different than a few percentage points of 10,000.
Yeah, that is so important. Thank you for that. So right now, children under 12 cannot be vaccinated, so they are still relying on masks and distancing and the precautions we have been taking throughout the pandemic. But as a parent, and I would imagine other parents, this is increasingly becoming more difficult to navigate because things are opening. The vaccine status is unknown for a lot of these scenarios. How should parents be thinking about this?
It is very tricky. You know, we have a 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old at my house. I know lots of families who have sort of a mixed household, right? So parents are vaccinated, potentially older kids and teens are vaccinated, but younger siblings are not. And ultimately, I think, number one, the best thing we can do to protect our young kids is for those who are eligible to get the vaccine, who live in their household, to sort of help protect them. But we also have to think of it as if we're protecting an immunocompromised person, right? And so we do have to be much more careful than we would if everybody in the household was vaccinated. I have great hope that the vaccine will be available for kids under 12, hopefully down to age 5 by early fall, maybe by next month. And so I think parents are really holding out hope for that. And if we can just do our part a little bit longer, and I know we've been saying that for a year and a half, but I think at this point, there really is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of those younger kids being able to get that protection.
Yeah, I think a lot of families are hopeful that there will be a vaccine availability for kids under 12 by the fall. And until then, Dr. Mead, remind us about the effectiveness of masks in this scenario.
Masks are super effective. So really, they're one of the absolute best ways we have to protect kids who aren't vaccinated, other people who aren't vaccinated or aren't protected for some reason. So when we look at the data, it suggests that proper mask wearing, so covering your nose and mouth, changing to a clean mask, leaving it on, all the things we talk about, decreases that transmission risk by about 50%. And so when we layer that with other things like outdoor time, physical distancing, adults and older kids being vaccinated, we really can get that transmissibility down to a very low number. So I think people should still feel reassured that as we keep all these precautions in place, we're still doing a really good job protecting most kids and most people, but we have to continue to do those things for now.
And what do we know about vaccination rates for young people over age 12?
Yeah, great question. So they're quite different than we see in the adult population. So in the adult population in Washington State, for example, we're seeing numbers in the kind of 70+% range. For those 12 and over kids, it's more like 35 to 45%, depending on the age of the kids. And I think that's because a lot of parents still have questions. It's a very different decision for many people deciding to vaccinate yourself and deciding to vaccinate someone else who you're making the decision for, right? So while those 12 and older kids certainly can participate in that discussion, and I know lots of teenage patients who are asking for the vaccine and sort of proactively seeking it out themselves, I think people just have a different decision matrix when it comes to their kids. And that's very understandable. The reassuring thing is that all of the data we have suggests that this vaccine is highly effective, even more effective than in adults, and very safe for kids and teens to get. And so we really encourage people to do that, especially as we're heading back to school very soon for many people in Western Washington. They're going to be around other kids in a way they potentially haven't been for a duration they haven't been for many, many months. And so for the kids who are eligible, that vaccine is the best way we have to protect against all of the variants, but including that Delta variant.
We're talking about vaccine rates. I guess, based on what you're telling me, it would be important for parents to be very open about the conversation about whether or not their children are vaccinated, whether they are or they aren't.
Absolutely. That's right. There's no judgment here, but I think honesty is very important and transparency is very important. And so in the same way that parents ask other households where their kids are spending time, are there guns in the home? Is the pool fenced? Does the hot tub have a lock on it? How do you do trampoline safety? This is one of those safety conversations. And so I think when we have kids who aren't able to be protected and kids who are eligible for the vaccine, that's just a conversation that has to happen. And I think it should be able to be had in a way that's open, non-judgmental, and really collaborative.
Yeah, add that one to the list for sure. A lot of people, Dr. Mead, are excited to break out and travel again. How should families be preparing for travel, not only with unvaxxed members, but to be traveling to places where COVID outbreaks are happening?
This is one of the trickiest questions I get, and it's one of the trickiest questions for our household and I think every other household to make, because at this point, I think there are very different levels of travel, right? So there are travel that's just for fun because we want a vacation, and lots of people feel like that's needed. We haven't had that for a long time. But then there's travel, there are kids who haven't seen grandparents for a year and a half. And so that's a really different decision for a lot of people than potentially postponing a trip to Disneyland or some other big sort of crowded event, right? So there are things we can do to keep it as safe as possible. I will say, I think the reassuring thing is that airports and planes have one of the best track records as far as enforcing masks to be on. And so making sure that we're wearing masks, we're washing our hands, we're not traveling if we have any symptoms, if we're not certain that it's not COVID. Those are all things we can do to help protect each other. Again, I'd say, putting off things that are kind of just for fun and maybe could be done in a few months, that's probably a good idea for most people who have unvaccinated kids, again, because we anticipate that vaccine coming so soon.
Yeah. All of this, of course, leading up to the new school year. We are just weeks away. Elementary schools, of course, facing a different challenge at this point with the unvaxxed group. Will it be safe for children to return to school?
It is critically important that kids go back to school and are back in school in person. And, we have been saying from the AAP side, the American Academy of Pediatrics side, for the last year that there are ways to do that safely. Kids are very good about wearing masks. They're much better than adults in most cases. They're used to it now. It's just sort of part of their daily routine. And so getting kids back in school, wearing masks, doing as much physical spacing as possible, limiting that indoor kind of crowded time, maximizing outdoor time, ventilation, all these layered strategies that we talk about can be safe for kids to be back in school. And it is so important for their development, both social and their learning development, that they be back in that in-person environment. So, I am shocked in a very positive way at what teachers have been able to accomplish virtually this last year. Just hats off to them. They have done an incredible job, school staff and teachers. And we know that it's time for kids to be back in person. There's been a lot of learning loss. There's been a lot of kind of social and emotional development that's been hindered. And that certainly can be made up. But this year, it's just crucial that kids be back in person.
Yeah. It's hard to overstate, of course, what a setback this Delta variant feels like for everyone. We were so excited for the future. We were doing well. We had worked hard. How should people be thinking about the next few months? How are you thinking about the next few months?
Coronavirus has been one of those things that just has really kept us humble in the sense that it is so difficult to predict and things are changed so quickly and we have to be really nimble and facile with our guidance to sort of keep up with that. I think what the Delta variant really has shown us is that this is the critical importance of getting those high enough community vaccinated rates to protect everybody and to achieve that community immunity. And unfortunately, now that Delta variant is here, we're talking about a higher percentage that's needed. So we used to sort of have that 70% benchmark. And because Delta is so contagious, we're saying now it's probably more like 80 to 85+% that's needed to really achieve that immunity. But I think this is just a prime example for us of how things could have been different if enough adults in this country and older kids had gotten vaccinated so that this was not able to circulate in the way that it has. And I think it's a really good warning for us in terms of how to handle this for the future, that the most important thing is for people to get that vaccine so that we can protect the community at large and prevent these new variants from sort of achieving enough hold to spread in the way that we've seen Delta spread.
Dr. Mead, humbling is a good way to put it. Really appreciate your time. Dr. Elizabeth Mead is a pediatric hospital medicine physician at Swedish and the immediate past president of the Washington chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening. I hope you're following us on Instagram. We're at Seattle Now Pod. Jenny Cecil Moore produced today's show. Our production team is Clare McGrane, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Matt Martin, Diana Opong, and Jason Pagano. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.